This story is titled, Kicked Out My Wife and Her Daughter, because I had enough. Before we jump into today's video, I wanted to let you know about my new channel. It's got shorter videos and a fresh style. Be sure to check it out through the link in the description. Alright, let's dive into the video. OP starts off by saying, So yeah, here I am, 32-year-old guy, married for a year to a woman named Andy, who I thought was just incredible. She's 34, and I'm not kidding. Up until all this started happening, I genuinely thought I'd lucked out. We met, hit it off pretty well, and took things nice and slow, mostly because of her daughter Carrie. Carrie's 16 now, but when I met her, she was about 14. And man, I could tell right away she wasn't thrilled about me being there. Which, okay, fair enough. Her dad passed in a car accident 5 years ago, and Andy had been pretty much a single mom since then. So yeah, I knew going in this was going to be a tough sell with her kid. I told Andy from the start I didn't want to overstep or try to act like Carrie's dad or anything. I figured, I don't want to replace anyone here. I just wanted things to go as smoothly as possible. Andy and I decided not to even mention me to Carrie until we knew this relationship was solid. No point in stressing her out unless there was something serious going on between us. It took a while, but eventually we hit that point. And then came the big day I met Carrie. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous, but I was going in with an open mind, hoping she'd at least be okay with me just hanging around, you know? Well, that meeting was awkward as hell. Like, Carrie just stared at me like I'd shown up to steal the TV or something. Barely said a word to me, avoided eye contact, the whole 9 yards. And she wasn't even subtle about it. She'd make these faces every time I spoke, rolling her eyes, acting like she couldn't be bothered. Look, I get it. She probably felt like her mom was moving on too fast, or that I was some guy trying to take over. And I had zero plans to try and replace her dad. The last thing I wanted was to make her feel like I was forcing a relationship on her. I made sure she knew that too. Told her she could just call me by my first name, didn't need to call me stepdad, or anything weird like that. Andy told me to give it some time, and I figured, yeah, okay, maybe she'd come around if I didn't push it. So I tried. I'd do little things, like invite her to come out with us, or ask her if she wanted to go grab some food or something casual. Never forced anything. If she wasn't feeling it, I'd just back off. But man, every time I tried to engage, it felt like she'd throw a little dig my way, say something under her breath, or just flat out ignore me. I'd say something like, Hey Carrie, you want to go to this new burger place with us? And she'd just look right through me and say, No thanks, in that tone. You know? Like I was wasting her time even asking. One time I suggested that maybe we could go see a movie she wanted, and she actually laughed. She was like, Oh, I don't think you'd get it, with this sneer. I mean, all right, it's a teenage thing maybe, but it felt like she wasn't even trying. Andy would always tell me, She'll warm up, just give her time. But sometimes I'd think, how much time do I have to give? Things stayed awkward. I'd see glimpses where I thought maybe Carrie was thawing a bit, like she'd actually answer a question now and then, without the usual eye roll or sigh. But every time I thought we were getting somewhere, it was back to square one. Like this one weekend, when we all went to Andy's parents' place for a family thing. I thought, okay, neutral territory, maybe things will go smoother. Nope. Carrie avoided me the entire time and made this huge deal about sitting as far from me as possible at every meal. At one point, she actually got up and switched chairs because she thought I was sitting too close. I'd bring it up with Andy, try to talk about it, just to see if maybe there was something I was missing or something I could do differently. And Andy was always like, just let her be. She's been through a lot, losing her dad and all. She'll come around. I understood where she was coming from, but it felt like I was supposed to just stand there and take it without saying anything. And maybe I should have, I don't know. I kept telling myself it would get better, but it didn't. After a while, I was starting to feel like a guest in my own relationship. Like if Carrie didn't want me there, I didn't belong. I kept wondering if I'd ever even have a decent conversation with her without her snapping back or blowing me off. Andy would always try to play peacemaker, but honestly, I felt like she was stuck in the middle, and I didn't want her feeling like she had to choose between us. Now, I know how this sounds. Some might say, hey, it's just teenage stuff, but this wasn't normal. It felt personal. I'd come home, try to have a normal day, and bam, Carrie's doing something passive-aggressive or throwing shade at me. The tension was thick, like I was walking on eggshells in my own house, and every little attempt to make things better felt like it was backfiring. I mean, how do you even deal with that? I didn't want to fight with a 16-year-old. I just wanted things to be okay. Looking back, maybe I could have tried something different. But what? I wasn't going to kiss her. or beg her to like me. I wasn't the enemy here, just a guy trying to be a good partner to her mom. And even though I knew her dad's death was a huge loss, it wasn't an excuse for her to keep treating me like dirt. I tried to be the bigger person, to just let her comments and attitudes slide, thinking maybe she'd grow out of it. But honestly, I was starting to get fed up. How much was I supposed to take? Andy kept saying she'd get better, but I was stuck waiting, hoping this invisible better time would come. And every time Carrie ignored me, every time she threw one of her attitude bombs, it felt like another slap in the face, like I wasn't good enough to be part of their lives. Anyway, I'd convinced myself that once we all moved in together, things would change. That maybe she'd feel more at home and maybe start seeing me as more than just mom's annoying new husband. I'd never lived with a teenager before, so I thought it was just going to be an adjustment period. Thought I'd get to know her better. Maybe even grow close, as wild as that seems now. But if I'd known what was coming, maybe I would have thought twice about getting that serious with Andy at all. Moving in was just the beginning of a whole new level of chaos, and as much as I wanted to believe Carrie would come around, the truth was, I was diving headfirst into something I had no control over. And man, was I in for a rude awakening. So, we finally decided to take the plunge and all move in together. I was honestly hopeful that maybe Carrie just needed more time around me. Like maybe she'd just been feeling like a stranger in her mom's relationship this whole time, and that living together would help break down those walls. I was hoping for one of those moments where we'd all have some big family bonding experience, and Carrie would finally see I wasn't the enemy. But man, was I wrong. The second they moved into my place, it was like Carrie flipped a switch and took her attitude from distant and cold to full-blown hostility. I'm talking about trashing my stuff, giving me the silent treatment, and straight up treating me like I was some invader in my own damn house. She'd ignore me so hard that I'd actually have to double-check if I was even in the same room. It was like she saw me as some kind of threat that needed to be fought off at every turn. At first it was small stuff, like leaving her dishes piled up in the sink, which I thought was a normal teenager thing. I'd just clean them up and move on because, picking battles and all that. But things escalated fast. I started noticing little acts of rebellion, tiny messes left around just to piss me off, towels thrown on the bathroom floor, garbage not taken out, random stuff like that. I'd mention it to Andy, hoping she'd see what was going on, but she'd just brush it off with, "Oh, it's just a phase, she'll grow out of it." Then one day, I come home from work and head into the kitchen, and there's glass all over the damn floor. I mean, shards of glass everywhere, like a whole set of plates and cups had been smashed. I thought maybe she had dropped something by accident, so I started cleaning it up, but then I noticed some of the pieces looked, like, intentionally broken. I'm talking about clean breaks, the kind you get from someone chucking stuff as hard as they can. I asked Andy about it, and she looked stressed but tried to play it off, saying, "Oh, she's just frustrated. I'll talk to her." And I'm like, frustrated? So what, she just goes full destruction mode now? But I bit my tongue and just let her deal with it, hoping maybe a talk from her mom would actually help. Well, it didn't. If anything, Carrie just doubled down. She started going for the petty stuff, and it was like she was finding creative ways to make my life hell. She'd leave half-empty cans of soda tipped over on the coffee table, so the drink would spill all over, and then she'd leave it like that for me to find. Or she'd dump a whole bag of chips on the couch and just leave the crumbs smashed into the fabric staring right at me like, "What are you going to do about it?" I tried to tell Andy, "Look, this isn't normal. She's going out of her way to be disrespectful." But Andy would always just sigh and tell me, "She's going through a tough time. Just be patient." Being patient was getting harder by the day. And yeah, I'll admit it, I have a bit of a temper, but I was really holding back for Andy's sake. I didn't want to be the angry stepdad or whatever, so I'd take deep breaths and try to ignore it, even though every time I came home, I had no idea what new mess Carrie had cooked up. And then came the big one. I'll never forget this because it's the day I finally lost it. I'd just come home from a long day, and as soon as I stepped inside, there was this god-awful smell, like something had died in there. I'm sniffing around, trying to find the source, and I finally realize it's coming from the fridge. I open it up, and there's raw chicken sitting out on the top shelf, just out in the open, not even wrapped. It had been left there for who knows how long because the stench was overwhelming. Turns out Carrie had taken the chicken out for meal prep, her words not mine, and just left it there, like she couldn't be bothered to clean up. I called her down, trying to keep my voice steady, and asked her what the hell was going on. She just shrugged and said, "I forgot." That's all she had to say. No apology, nothing. I ended up cleaning it myself, grumbling to myself the whole time, trying not to explode. But then, just a few days later, she topped even that. I walk into the garage to get something, and I find a bunch of my tools just lying around, covered in mud. Carrie had been messing around in there and decided to treat my stuff like it was some kind of playground. I asked her, "Why are my tools covered in mud?" And she just looked at me, deadpan, and said, "I needed them." So what? I finally snapped. I yelled, probably louder than I should have, telling her this was my house, and she needed to respect my things. Andy heard the whole thing and came rushing in, trying to mediate, telling me, "Please, don't make it worse." But at that point, I was done. I told Andy straight up, "This can't keep going. I'm sick of Carrie's crap." Andy looked hurt, but I didn't care at that moment. I'd been trying to be the nice guy, trying to be patient, but Carrie was treating me like I was trash, and I wasn't about to keep dealing with it. Andy promised me, again, that she'd talk to Carrie, and I just laughed and said, "Sure, maybe this time it'll actually work." But the next day, Carrie pulled her most ridiculous stunt yet. I woke up to find that she'd gone into my office and unplugged all my computer cables, just because. It took me half an hour to get everything back in place, and that was when I realized I was dealing with a kid who genuinely didn't give a damn about anyone but herself. This was no teenage phase. This was a full-on meltdown from a kid who thought she could get away with anything. At this point, every little thing she did felt like a personal attack. I couldn't walk into a single room without wondering what new chaos Carrie had left for me to find. And every time I'd bring it up to Andy, she'd just say, "She'll come around. Just give her space." Well, I'd given all the space I had. I was losing my mind trying to keep it together while Carrie was wrecking my stuff and laughing it off. It was only a matter of time before I reached my breaking point. Looking back, maybe I could have done something different. But honestly, I was fed up with always having to be the one keeping the peace. I was tired of feeling like I was just waiting for Carrie to decide I was worth a sliver of respect. And deep down, I was starting to question if moving in together was the biggest mistake I'd ever made. So this is where it all went down, the point where I finally had enough. I had been putting up with Carrie's mess and attitude for what felt like forever, hoping things would eventually get better. But turns out, I was just a sucker for thinking anything was going to change. Because the way she crossed the line this time, there was no going back. It started off like any other night. Andy and I decided to go out for dinner, just the two of us. We hadn't had a real date night in a while, and honestly, I needed a break from the constant tension in the house. Andy was always saying I needed to see the good in Carrie, but I hadn't seen anything remotely good from that kid in months. So yeah, I was looking forward to a few hours of peace. We get back from dinner, pull into the driveway, and as soon as I get out of the car, I see the garage door is wide open. Now, I know I closed it when we left, because I'm pretty paranoid about that kind of thing. And even if I hadn't, it was late at night by this point. Carrie should have been inside, not in the garage. So I'm already on edge, thinking something's off. I step into the garage, and I freeze. Right there in the middle of the garage is my car, my pride and joy, a BMW X5, and it's trashed. I'm talking slashed tires, deep scratches down the sides, and what looks like a broken side mirror. There are even scuff marks on the hood, like someone had been stomping on it. And who's standing there with a kitchen knife in her hand, looking as calm as can be? Carrie. I felt my blood go cold. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She just stood there, looking at me with this smug little smirk on her face, like she was proud of herself. I managed to choke out, "What the hell, Carrie? What are you doing?" And she just shrugged, all casual, like this wasn't some felony-level vandalism she'd just committed. "It's just a car," she says. "Just a car." I lost it. I'd been holding back for months, letting all her little stunts slide, trying to keep the peace for Andy's sake. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. I straight up called her a spoiled little brat and told her to get the hell out of my sight. I know I shouldn't have yelled, but what else was I supposed to do? She just destroyed my car for fun. At this point, Andy comes running into the garage, probably because she heard the yelling. She takes one look at the car, and instead of laying into Carrie, she turns to me, all calm, and says, "It's not as bad as it looks. She's just acting out. Don't make it worse by yelling." I couldn't believe it. I'm standing there, staring at my car, thousands of dollars in damage right in front of us, and she's telling me not to make it worse. I looked at Andy, speechless. I mean, how could she possibly defend this? I told her, "This isn't acting out. This is criminal behavior. She needs to face consequences." But Andy didn't want to hear it. She tried to pull Carrie away, saying they'd talk about it in the morning, and that we should all cool off. I wasn't cooling off. Not after what Carrie had done. So I told Andy right then and there, "If you think this is okay, If you're fine with Carrie destroying my property and treating me like crap, then both of you can leave. Andy's jaw dropped. She wasn't expecting me to say that. She kept saying, "You don't mean that. You're just angry." But I wasn't just angry. I was done. Done with being disrespected in my own home, done with the constant messes, and done with Carrie's attitude. I was tired of playing the bad guy, while Carrie got a free pass on everything. I told Andy, if she doesn't pay for the damage, I'll sue her. Yeah, it sounds extreme, but I'd hit my breaking point. I've got cameras in the garage. Everything was on tape. There was no way she was getting away with this. Andy's face went pale, and she started tearing up, saying I was being heartless and taking things too far. She tried to guilt trip me, saying that Carrie was going through a lot and that she'd been struggling since her dad died. I get it. Losing a parent is brutal, but it doesn't give you a free pass to wreck someone's property and show zero remorse about it. I told her, I'm sorry for what Carrie's going through, but this is too much. This kind of behavior isn't normal, and I'm not going to pretend it is just to keep the peace. We went back and forth for about 15 minutes, me telling Andy that if Carrie didn't pay for the damage, I'd take her to court, and Andy saying I was cruel for even suggesting it. It was like she was so blinded by her loyalty to Carrie that she couldn't see the damage Carrie was causing. Not just to my car, but to our entire relationship. And honestly, at that moment, I realized Andy was never going to see it. I had been fooling myself this whole time, thinking she'd come around and actually stand up for me. But here she was, defending Carrie even when the kid had slashed my tires and trashed my car. I looked at Carrie one last time, and she was just standing there, not a single ounce of guilt on her face. That smug little smirk was still there, like she'd won some game I didn't even know we were playing. That's when I told them both, "Get out! Pack your bags and go." They looked shocked, like they couldn't believe I'd actually followed through. Andy started begging me to calm down, saying we could work it out, that Carrie didn't mean it. But I was beyond caring at that point. I was done trying to fix things when it was obvious no one else was interested in making this work. As they left, I stood there, looking at the wreck that was once my car, feeling more drained than I've ever felt in my life. I'd spent a year trying to make this family work, putting up with so much crap because I loved Andy and wanted a life with her. But when it came down to it, Carrie's actions showed me exactly where I stood, and Andy's reaction proved it. That night, I sat in the quiet, wondering how the hell it had all come to this. I felt stupid for letting it go on this long, for hoping things would change when they never would. But one thing was clear. I wasn't letting Carrie or anyone else walk all over me anymore. This was the last straw, and I'd finally had enough. After they left, I sat there in the silence, feeling a weird mix of anger and relief. I kept looking out the window, half expecting Andy to come back, or for Carrie to storm in with another tantrum, but no one came back. For the first time in what felt like ages, the house was completely quiet. It hit me then that it was really over. This whole year had been this constant push and pull, with me trying to make things work, bending over backward to make everyone happy. But now that they were gone, I finally felt what it was like to have peace. And honestly, it was amazing. I went back into the garage to look at my car. The slashed tires, the scratches, the damage Carrie had done, it was all still there. Seeing it pissed me off, but at the same time, it was like a reminder of why things had to end. I didn't feel guilty for telling them to leave. After everything Carrie put me through and Andy just letting it slide, I knew this was the right decision. There was no going back. That night, I slept better than I had in months. I didn't have to worry about stepping on broken glass in the kitchen or finding my tools scattered all over the garage. I didn't have to walk into a room and wonder what kind of mess Carrie had left for me. For once, I actually felt at home in my own place. The next morning, I started making plans to move on. I knew I'd have to deal with the car situation, figure out if I was going to repair it or replace it, and maybe even file a police report if it came to that. But for now, I just wanted to enjoy the quiet, to actually feel like I was in control of my own life again. As the days went by, I started getting texts from Andy. At first, she was just checking in, asking if we could talk. She'd send these long messages, telling me how much she missed me, how she thought we could work things out, how Carrie was just acting out because of her dad's death. Same stuff she'd been saying all along. And honestly, it just reminded me why I couldn't keep doing this. I'd given it everything I had, tried to make it work, and Carrie kept pushing every single button I had while Andy defended her. I ignored most of the texts. I knew if I replied, it would just lead to another back and forth where she'd try to talk me into taking them back. But I wasn't interested. I'd made my decision, and I was sticking to it. A few days later, Andy showed up at the house. I hadn't answered her messages, so I guess she decided to try face-to-face. I opened the door, and there she was, looking all teary-eyed and apologetic. She told me how hard things had been for her and Carrie, how Carrie was still struggling with losing her dad, and how she thought I was giving up on them too easily. I just listened, but the more she talked, the more I realized nothing had changed. She was still making excuses, still defending Carrie, still refusing to see my side. Finally, I stopped her and told her, "Look, I've put up with this for a year. I've given everything I could to make this family work, and all I got was disrespect and chaos. I'm done." She looked hurt, but I could tell she didn't really understand. She started saying things like, "Carrie will change," and "We can work through this." But I wasn't buying it. I told her, "You had a year to make her understand that she couldn't just treat people like crap and get away with it, and you did nothing. I can't live like that anymore." After a long, awkward silence, she finally nodded and said she understood. I think, for the first time, she realized that I wasn't going to back down, that I wasn't going to let Carrie walk all over me anymore. She tried to say a few more things, but I just told her goodbye and closed the door. I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into changing my mind. Once she was gone, I felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders. I'd been holding on to this idea of us being this happy little family, but that was just some fantasy I'd built up in my head. The reality was that I'd been living in a nightmare, and it was finally over. In the days that followed, I started putting my life back together. I focused on fixing up the house, getting things organized, making it feel like my place again. It felt like I was reclaiming my space, and with every little thing I did, I felt more like myself. People started asking questions, of course. Friends and family wanted to know what happened, why Andy and Carrie were gone. I kept it simple, just told them it didn't work out. No one really pushed for details, and that was fine by me. I wasn't interested in rehashing every little thing Carrie had done, or explaining why Andy hadn't backed me up. The people who knew me well could tell I was happier, and that was enough. There were moments, though, when I'd think back on it all and feel a bit of sadness, maybe a little regret. Not because I missed them, but because I'd put so much time and energy into something that turned out to be a complete mess. I'd wanted a family, wanted to be that supportive partner for Andy, and it hadn't worked out. But in the end, I realized it was better to be alone and happy than stuck in a toxic situation where I was constantly disrespected. One day, I was cleaning out the garage and finally decided to get rid of some of the things that reminded me of Carrie and Andy. I tossed out some random junk they'd left behind, old clothes, notebooks, whatever. And as I was doing it, I felt like I was really moving forward, like I was closing that chapter of my life for good. Final update. So, after everything went down, Andy reached out, wanting to talk. I'll be honest, I wasn't thrilled to meet up, but I thought maybe there'd be some sort of closure, or maybe she'd finally see my side. We sat down, and she started talking about how we could work through it, and how I needed to just be patient. She wanted me to come back and try again, promising that Carrie would get better, that this was all just a rough phase. But I was done. I mean, I'd already been patient. I'd been giving chances for a year while Carrie wrecked my stuff and my peace of mind, and Andy let it happen every single time. I told her as calmly as I could, "I'm sorry, but I'm done, Andy. I can't keep doing this." I explained that I needed to think about myself for once, that this wasn't just about one incident, but a whole pattern of disrespect and chaos. And honestly, I could tell she didn't fully get it. I think she really believed this could be fixed if I just put up with Carrie's nonsense a little longer. But the thing is, I didn't want to put up with it. I was tired of waiting for a kid who had zero respect for me, tired of Andy constantly defending her, and tired of feeling like an outsider in my own home. So we ended up signing the divorce papers pretty quickly. Thanks to our prenup and the fact that we didn't share finances, it wasn't a messy process. It was actually pretty simple. We just sat down with the papers, signed them, and that was that. No need to drag it out any more than we already had. In some ways, it felt surreal. Like, is this really it? But I knew deep down that this was the right thing to do. The relief I felt was all the proof I needed. Of course, there was still the matter of the car damage. That was where things got tricky. My insurance company wouldn't cover it because apparently vandalism wasn't included in my policy. So all 6,000 euros worth of damage was on me. Seeing that estimate was like a punch to the gut, especially after everything else that had happened. I told Andy straight up that Carrie needed to take responsibility for what she'd done and cover the costs. But surprise, surprise, Andy didn't have the money, and she wasn't exactly in a position to help. She'd moved back in with her parents and was struggling to find her own place, so her hands were tied. I debated for a while whether I should just let it go, but honestly, why should I? Carrie had to learn that actions have consequences, and I was tired of being the one constantly left to pick up the pieces. So, I made a deal with Andy. I'd cover the cost of the repairs up front, and she'd pay me back monthly until it was all settled. We even got it written up officially, just so there'd be no forgetting or backing out. I wasn't going to leave it to chance. And because I'd filed a police report, Carrie now has a criminal record. I know some people might think that's extreme, but if you'd been in my shoes, you'd understand. She brought this on herself. Maybe now she'd realize she couldn't just go around trashing people's property and expecting no consequences. The weeks that followed were interesting. I'll admit, it was strange at first, coming home to an empty house, without all the messes and attitude waiting for me. I'd grown so used to the tension that it took a little while to get used to the quiet. But the weird thing? After the first few days, I started to feel a lot lighter. It was like this massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had would disappear. I'd spent a year being patient, being understanding, bending over backward to keep the peace, and where did it get me? A slashed-up car and a stepdaughter who treated me like dirt. No! I didn't regret my decision one bit. And thanks to all of you here who told me I wasn't the a-hole. I know this might sound cheesy, but your comments actually helped a lot. It's weird to think about, but sometimes it's easier to get perspective from people who don't even know you than from those who do. Reading your comments, seeing the support, the "you're not the bad guy here" messages, it was exactly what I needed to keep moving forward. Every now and then, I'd get a text from Andy. Nothing too major, just little messages checking in, seeing how I was doing. I ignored most of them. I wasn't interested in rehashing anything or being guilt-tripped into second-guessing myself. She'd made her choice when she sided with Carrie time after time, and I'd made mine. Besides, the last thing I needed was to get pulled back into that mess. Now, with everything behind me, I'm focusing on getting my life back on track. I started doing little projects around the house, fixing things up, organizing, making it feel like mine again. It's amazing how different everything feels, without all that stress hanging over me. I'm reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in months, making time for hobbies I'd let go of, just taking care of myself for once. And yeah, it feels pretty damn good. So yeah, it's been a hell of a few weeks, but in the end, I feel lighter. I feel free. I've got my peace, my space, and my sanity back, and that's worth more than anything I could have gained by staying. Here's to moving on. And thanks to all of you who reminded me I wasn't the a-hole in this mess.
I never thought I'd be grateful for my mother's obsession with prenups. But here we are, I muttered, staring at the pristine white walls of our new home. The house was a wedding gift from my parents, Patricia and George, nestled in the picturesque landscape of Upper New York. It was supposed to be the start of our happily ever after, but life had other plans. My husband Bart was busy unpacking boxes in the living room, his tall frame bent over as he sorted through our belongings. "Natalie, honey, can you give me a hand with this?" he called out, his voice muffled by the cardboard. I sighed, pushing away from the window. "Coming," I replied, plastering on a smile as I joined him. As I helped Bart unpack, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He'd been unusually quiet since we arrived, his usual charm and easygoing nature replaced by a nervous energy. "Everything okay?" I asked, placing a hand on his arm. Bart hesitated, then set down the box he was holding. "Actually, there's something we need to talk about," he said, his blue eyes clouded with worry. My stomach dropped. "What is it?" Before Bart could answer, the doorbell rang. He visibly relaxed, as if saved by the bell. "That must be Mom," he said, hurrying to the door. I froze. His mother, Jennifer, wasn't supposed to visit until next week. I followed Bart to the entryway, where he was already embracing a petite woman with graying hair. "Jennifer," I said, forcing a smile. "What a surprise." Jennifer pulled away from Bart and turned to me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Oh, Natalie," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry to barge in like this, but I couldn't wait any longer." Bart placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. "Mom, why don't we sit down?" he suggested, leading her to the living room. As we settled onto the couch, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, I felt a growing sense of dread. Jennifer clutched Bart's hand, her knuckles white. "What's going on?" I asked, looking between them. Jennifer took a deep breath. "I've been diagnosed with terminal cancer," she said, her words hanging heavy in the air. "The doctors say I have less than a year." I gasped, genuinely shocked. "Oh, Jennifer, I'm so sorry," I said, reaching out to touch her arm. She gave me a watery smile. "Thank you, dear, but that's not all." She glanced at Bart, who nodded encouragingly. I can't live alone anymore, and I was hoping, well, we were hoping. Bart cleared his throat. Mom's going to move in with us, Natalie, he said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Our new home, our fresh start, was suddenly being invaded. But how could I object? The woman was dying, for heaven's sake. Of course, I heard myself say, as if from a distance, we have plenty of room. Jennifer's face lit up. Oh, thank you both so much, she gushed, pulling us into a group hug. As we embraced, I caught Bart's eye over his mother's shoulder. He mouthed a silent, thank you, but I couldn't bring myself to smile back. This wasn't how our life together was supposed to begin. Later that night, as Bart slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. How had our perfect new beginning turned into this? I loved Bart, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing control of my own life. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a series of events that would test the limits of my love, patience, and ultimately my capacity for revenge. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen as I tried to focus on my laptop screen. 3 weeks had passed since Jennifer moved in, and I felt like a stranger in my own home. Every morning, I'd find her rearranging my carefully organized cupboards or changing our routines without consultation. Natalie, dear, Jennifer's voice chirped from behind me. I hope you don't mind, but I've invited the ladies from my support group over for tea this afternoon. I gripped my coffee mug tighter, forcing a smile. Actually, Jennifer, I have an important conference call scheduled for... Oh, don't worry, she interrupted, patting my shoulder. We'll be quiet as church mice. You won't even know we're here. Before I could protest further, Bart wandered into the kitchen, still in his pajamas despite it being nearly noon. Morning, ladies, he yawned, kissing his mother's cheek before giving me a quick peck. Bart, I said, trying to keep my voice level, can I talk to you for a minute, in private? He followed me to our bedroom, looking confused. What's up, honey? I took a deep breath. Bart, we need to set some boundaries with your mother. She's taking over the house, changing things without asking, and now she's inviting people over during my work hours. Bart's face fell. Come on, Nat. She's going through a tough time. Can't you cut her some slack? I've been cutting her slack for weeks, I snapped. But this is our home, and I need some say in what goes on here. It's her home now, too, Bart replied, his voice hardening. And in case you've forgotten, she's dying. The least we can do is make her comfortable. I felt a surge of anger. And what about my comfort? My work? Does that not matter anymore? Bart's eyes narrowed. I can't believe how selfish you're being right now. My mother needs us, and all you can think about is yourself. His words hit me like a slap. Selfish? I've bent over backward to accommodate her, but there has to be a limit. Well, maybe you need to be more flexible, Bart shot back. Family comes first, Natalie. I thought you understood that. I stared at him, feeling a chasm opening between us. I thought we were a family, Bart, you and me. He shook his head, looking disappointed. We are, but that includes my mother now, too. I need you to accept that. Without another word, he turned and left the room. I stood there, stunned by the realization that for the first time in our marriage, Bart had chosen someone else over me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. True to her word, Jennifer's friends were quiet, but their presence felt like an invasion. I struggled to concentrate on my call, acutely aware of the murmured conversations and occasional laughter drifting up from downstairs. That evening, as I was clearing up the kitchen, I overheard Bart and Jennifer talking in the living room. I'm worried about Natalie, Jennifer said softly. She seems so tense all the time. Maybe this arrangement isn't working out. No, Mom, Bart replied firmly. This is your home now. Natalie will adjust. She just needs time. I set down the plate I was holding, my hands shaking. Adjust? Was that all I was expected to do? Silently accept the complete upheaval of my life? As I stood there, grappling with a mix of hurt and anger, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me looked tired, defeated. This wasn't the strong, independent Natalie I knew myself to be. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized that if I didn't stand up for myself now, I might lose myself entirely. But how could I fight back without seeming like the villain in this family drama? Little did I know, the situation was about to become even more complicated, pushing me closer to the breaking point and setting the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. I was in the middle of a crucial work presentation when my phone buzzed incessantly. Ignoring it, I powered through, only to find 5 missed calls from Bart when I finished. My heart raced as I dialed him back, fearing the worst about Jennifer's health. "Nat, great news!" Bart's voice boomed through the speaker. "Cole's coming home." I blinked, confused. "Cole? Your brother? What do you mean, coming home?" "He's quitting his job in California and moving back east," Bart explained, his excitement palpable. "He'll stay with us while he gets back on his feet. Isn't it fantastic?" The room spun. Another person in our already crowded house? "Bart, wait a minute. We can't just—" "Oh, Mom's calling. Gotta go, love you." He hung up before I could protest. I sat there, stunned. How could Bart make such a monumental decision without even consulting me? Our home wasn't a halfway house for his entire family. That evening, I confronted Bart in the kitchen while Jennifer watched her favorite game show in the living room. "We need to talk about Cole," I said, keeping my voice low. Bart looked up from chopping vegetables. "What about him? Isn't it great he's coming back?" I took a deep breath. "Bart, you can't just invite people to live in our home without discussing it with me first." He set down the knife, frowning. "Cole's family, Natalie. He needs our support. And what about what I need?" I countered. "This is my home, too, and I feel like I'm losing all control over it." Bart's expression hardened. "You're being selfish again. Cole's going through a tough time, and Mom needs all the family support she can get." "Don't you dare call me selfish," I hissed. "I've bent over backward to accommodate your mother, but this is too much. We're supposed to be partners, Bart. You can't keep making these decisions unilaterally." "I'm not," he insisted. "I'm doing what's best for our family." "Our family?" I laughed bitterly. "It seems like your definition of our family doesn't include me anymore." Jennifer's voice floated in from the living room. "Is everything all right in there, dears?" Bart called back. "Everything's fine, Mom," before turning to me with a pleading look. "Can we talk about this later? I don't want to upset her." I threw up my hands in frustration and stormed out of the kitchen. As I passed the living room, Jennifer caught my eye, her expression a mix of concern and something else. Was that triumph? The next few days were a flurry of activity as Bart prepared for Cole's arrival. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the growing resentment in my chest. The night before Cole was due to arrive, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. "Nat?" Bart's voice was soft in the darkness. "Are you still upset about Cole?" I turned to face him. "It's not just about Cole, Bart. It's about us. I feel like I'm losing you to your family." He reached out, pulling me close. "You're not losing me. You're my wife, and I love you. But my family needs me right now. Can't you understand that?" I wanted to understand. I really did. But as I lay there in Bart's arms, I couldn't shake the feeling that our marriage was slipping away, one family crisis at a time. The next morning, I steeled myself as I heard a car pull up outside. Moments later, the front door burst open, and Cole's booming voice filled the house. "Honey, I'm home," he called out, laughing at his own joke. I plastered on a smile and went to greet him, but stopped short in the hallway. Cole wasn't alone. Behind him stood a young woman, her arm linked with his. "Hey, sis," Cole grinned, oblivious to my shock. "Meet Amber, my fiancée. Hope you don't mind, but she'll be staying with us too. We're getting married." As Bart and Jennifer rushed to congratulate the happy couple, I stood frozen, feeling like an outsider in my own home. This wasn't just an invasion anymore. It was a full-scale takeover. And I was the only one who seemed to care. The once pristine kitchen counters were now cluttered with empty beer bottles and half-eaten bags of chips. I grimaced as I navigated the mess, the acrid smell of stale cigarette smoke assaulting my nostrils. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a frat house. "Cole," I called out, my patience wearing thin. "How many times do I have to ask you to clean up after yourself?" A muffled groan came from the living room. I stormed in to find Cole sprawled on the couch, Amber curled up beside him. The coffee table was littered with more bottles and an overflowing ashtray. "Sorry, sis," Cole mumbled, not bothering to open his eyes. "We'll get to it later." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to scream. "No, you'll get to it now. I have clients coming over in an hour, and this place is a pigsty." Amber stirred, fixing me with a bleary-eyed glare. Chill out, Natalie. It's not like it's a big deal. Before I could respond, Jennifer appeared in the doorway, her face etched with concern. What's all the commotion about? I turned to her, exasperated. Jennifer, look at this mess. It's unacceptable. She waved a dismissive hand. Oh, they're young. Let them have their fun. I'll tidy up later. That's not the point, I snapped. This is my home, and I expect it to be respected. Jennifer's eyes narrowed. Our home, dear. Remember, we're all family here. The word family felt like a slap in the face. I opened my mouth to argue further, but the smell of smoke suddenly intensified. Whirling around, I saw flames licking up the curtains near where Cole had carelessly tossed a cigarette butt. Fire, I screamed, rushing to grab the fire extinguisher. Chaos erupted as everyone scrambled to action. I managed to douse the flames, but not before they left a large charred hole in the expensive curtains my mother had gifted us. As the smoke cleared, I stood there, shaking with anger and shock. Bart burst into the room, having heard the commotion from upstairs. What happened? He demanded, looking around wildly. Your brother? I spat. Almost burned down our house because he can't be bothered to use an ashtray. Cole had the decency to look ashamed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. Save it, I cut him off. I want you and Amber out, now. Bart stepped between us. Natalie, calm down, it was an accident. I couldn't believe my ears. Calm down? Bart, do you not see how serious this is? Of course I do, he said, his voice maddeningly calm. But kicking them out isn't the answer. We're family, we need to stick together. I looked around at their faces, Bart's pleading, Jennifer's disapproving, Cole's sheepish, Amber's defiant. In that moment, I felt more alone than ever. Fine, I said, my voice cold. If that's how you all feel, I'll be the one to leave. I stormed upstairs, throwing some clothes into a bag. As I zipped it up, Bart appeared in the doorway. Nat, don't do this, he begged. Where will you go? I shouldered past him. Anywhere but here. As I reached the front door, Jennifer called out, Natalie, dear, you're overreacting. Why don't we all sit down and talk about this? I turned to face them one last time. There's nothing to talk about. You've made it clear where your priorities lie, Bart. And it's not with me or our marriage. With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I got into my car, hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, I realized I had no idea where I was going. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay in that house another minute. As I drove away, tears blurring my vision, I felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The life I thought I had, the marriage I believed in, it was all crumbling around me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider a possibility I'd been avoiding for weeks. Maybe this marriage wasn't worth saving after all. I returned home after 3 days at a hotel, my anger simmering, but my resolve strengthened. As I walked through the front door, the eerie silence struck me. No TV blaring, no chatter, no mess in sight. Something was off. Bart emerged from the kitchen, his face a mask of forced calm. Natalie, we need to talk. I steeled myself. Yes, we do. This situation is untenable, Bart. Things need to change. He nodded, gesturing to the living room. As we sat down, I noticed Jennifer peering from behind a partially closed door. My jaw clenched. I've been thinking, Bart began, his voice unnaturally steady. Maybe it's best if we take some time apart. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? He couldn't meet my eyes. It's just the constant arguing, the tension. It's not good for anyone, especially Mom in her condition. I felt like I was drowning. So you want to separate because I'm making your mother uncomfortable? It's not just that, he hurried to add. Your attitude, the constant nagging, it's creating a toxic environment for everyone. I laughed bitterly. My attitude? Bart, have you looked around lately? Your family has taken over our home, our life. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about, he sighed. You keep saying your family like they're not your family, too. Because they're not acting like it, I exploded. They've shown zero respect for me or this home, and you've done nothing but enable them. Bart's face hardened. They're going through a difficult time. I thought you'd be more understanding. Understanding? I was on my feet now, shaking with fury. I've been nothing but understanding. I've put up with your mother rearranging my home, your brother nearly burning it down, and you've consistently chosen them over me, your wife. That's not fair, Bart protested weakly. No, what's not fair is you blindsiding me with this separation nonsense instead of standing up for our marriage. The door creaked open, and Jennifer stepped out, her face a picture of concern. I'm so sorry, dears. I never meant to cause such strife. I rounded on her. Oh, save it, Jennifer. This is exactly what you wanted, isn't it? To drive a wedge between us? Bart jumped to his feet. That's enough. How dare you accuse my mother? Your mother, your brother, your family, I spat. That's all I've heard for months. What about me, Bart? What about us? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. I don't know what you want from me, Natalie. I'm trying to keep everyone happy. Except me, I finished for him. Well, congratulations. You've succeeded in making everyone happy but your wife. Jennifer stepped closer, reaching out to touch my arm. Natalie, dear, perhaps if you tried to be a little more accommodating. I jerked away from her. Don't touch me, and don't you dare tell me how to behave in my own home. Bart's eyes flashed with anger. That's it. I can't take this anymore. Natalie, I think you should leave. Take some time to cool off and think about your priorities. I stared at him, disbelief and hurt warring inside me. My priorities? What about yours, Bart? When did I stop being your priority? He didn't answer, just looked away. In that moment, I saw our marriage for what it truly was, a sham, a convenience for Bart to play the dutiful son and brother while I faded into the background. Fine, I said, my voice cold. I'll leave, but don't expect me to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. This time, you've gone too far. As I stormed upstairs to pack a bag, I heard Jennifer consoling Bart, telling him he'd done the right thing. Their voices faded as I moved through our bedroom, grabbing essentials. My hand paused over a framed photo of Bart and me on our wedding day. With a sudden, decisive movement, I slammed it face down. That happy couple was gone, replaced by strangers occupying the same space. As I left, bag in hand, I realized this wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. It was about saving myself. I sat in my best friend Sarah's living room, clutching a glass of wine like a lifeline. My voice cracked as I recounted the events of the past few months, ending with Bart's devastating suggestion of separation. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. That spineless weasel! How dare he choose his family over you? I sighed, feeling drained. I don't know what to do, Sarah. I feel like I've lost everything. She leaned forward, her expression determined. No, Natalie, you haven't lost everything. You've lost dead weight. It's time to take back control of your life. Her words sparked something inside me. But how? Bart and his family have taken over my home, my life. Sarah's lips curved into a sly smile. Remember who owns that house, Nat? Your parents gave it to you, not Bart. My eyes widened as realization dawned. You're right, the deed is in my name. Exactly, Sarah nodded. It's time to talk to your parents and a lawyer. You need to protect yourself and your assets. The next day, I met with my parents, Patricia and George. Their faces were a mix of concern and anger as I explained the situation. Oh, sweetheart, Mom said, pulling me into a hug. We had no idea things had gotten so bad. Dad's voice was steel. That boy never deserved you, Natalie, or our generosity. I took a deep breath. I need your help. I want to fight back, but I'm not sure how. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. We have just the person, Dad said, reaching for his phone. Remember your cousin Michael? He's a divorce attorney now. Within hours, I was sitting in Michael's office, laying out my story. He listened intently, his brow furrowing as I spoke. Natalie, he said when I finished, based on what you've told me, you have a strong case. The house is clearly your separate property, not a marital asset. Bart has no claim to it. Hope bloomed in my chest. So what do we do? Michael's smile was predatory. We go on the offensive. I'll draw up divorce papers immediately. We'll make it clear that Bart and his family need to vacate your property. As I left Michael's office, a plan forming in my mind, my phone buzzed. It was Bart. Natalie, please come home, his voice was pleading. We need to talk. I steeled myself. I'll be there in an hour. Walking into our house, my house, I felt a surge of confidence. Bart was waiting in the living room, looking haggard. Nat, I'm so sorry, he began. I've been thinking, and I realize I made a mistake. Can we please work this out? I almost laughed. Work what out, Bart? The fact that you chose your family over me? That you let them disrespect me in my own home? He flinched. I know I messed up, but no. I cut him off. There are no buts. It's too late for apologies. Bart's face fell. What are you saying? I took a deep breath, channeling all my hurt and anger into my next words. I'm saying it's over, Bart. I want a divorce. The color drained from his face. Divorce? Natalie? Please, let's not be hasty. Hasty, I scoffed. I've been patient for months, while you and your family walked all over me. Well, not anymore. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of concern. What's going on? I turned to her, my voice ice. What's going on is that you, Cole, and Amber need to start packing. This is my house, and I want you all out. Bart stood up, his face twisted with anger. You can't do that. This is our home. I pulled out the papers Michael had given me. Actually, I can. This house was a gift from my parents to me. It's not marital property, Bart. You have no claim to it. As the reality of the situation sank in, I saw the shock and disbelief on their faces. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of power and control. You have 1 week to move out, I said, my voice steady. All of you. As I turned to leave, Bart grabbed my arm. Natalie, please. Don't do this. I love you. I jerked away from him, tears stinging my eyes. If you loved me, Bart, we wouldn't be here. Goodbye. Walking out of the house, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, but most of all, a sense of liberation. The war wasn't over, but I had just won a major battle, and I was ready to fight for my life back, no matter what it took. The week following my ultimatum passed in a blur of legal meetings and tense silence at home. Bart and his family seemed to be in a state of shock, tiptoeing around me as if I might explode at any moment. Part of me relished their discomfort, but another part ached for the life I thought we'd have. On the day of our first negotiation meeting, I steeled myself in the parking lot of Michael's office. This was it, the moment that would define my future. As I walked in, I saw Bart sitting there with his own lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in her 50s. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Natalie, he said, his voice cracking, please, can we talk about this privately? I shook my head. We're beyond that, Bart. Let's just get this over with. Michael cleared his throat. All right, let's begin. Mr. Harrison, we've prepared a comprehensive divorce settlement. The main point of contention is, of course, the house. Bart's lawyer leaned forward. Yes, about that. My client contends that as the house was a wedding gift, it should be considered marital property. I felt a surge of anger, but Michael just smiled. I'm afraid that's not the case. We have documentation proving the house was gifted solely to Mrs. Harrison by her parents. It's her separate property. The color drained from Bart's face. What? But that's our home. We've lived there for years. Be that as it may, Michael continued, legally the house belongs to Natalie. She's within her rights to ask you and your family to vacate the premises. Bart turned to me, his eyes pleading. Natalie, you can't do this. Where will we go? What about my mother? I felt a lump in my throat but pushed through. I'm sorry, Bart, but you should have thought about that before you let your family take over our lives. His lawyer whispered something to him, and Bart's face hardened. Fine, if that's how you want to play it, we'll fight this in court. I'm sure a judge will see reason. Michael shook his head. I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Harrison. The law is clear on this matter. You'd be wasting time and money you don't have. The meeting devolved into heated arguments and tense negotiations. Hours passed, and I felt my energy draining. Just when I thought we'd reached an impasse, Bart suddenly deflated. Enough, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll sign the papers. We'll move out. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with sadness. This was really happening. My marriage was over. As we prepared to leave, Bart caught my arm. Natalie, I know I messed up, but is this really what you want? To throw away everything we had? I looked into his eyes, seeing the man I once loved. We threw it away a long time ago, Bart. This is just making it official. Leaving the office, I felt a mix of triumph and loss. I had won, but at what cost? That evening, as I sat alone in my quiet house, the reality of my situation hit me. I was free, but I was also alone. The house that was once filled with laughter and love now felt empty and cold. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. How did it go? Want me to come over? I stared at the message, tears welling up in my eyes. This was my new reality. No more Bart, no more in-laws, no more chaos. Just me in this big, empty house. As I typed my reply, I realized that this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. one that I would write on my own terms. "Come over," I texted back. "It's time to celebrate my independence." I took a deep breath, looking around at the house that was now truly mine. The battle was won, but the war of rebuilding my life was just beginning. And for the first time in months, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The day Bart and his family were set to move out dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging inside me. I stood at the window, watching as a moving truck pulled up to the curb. Bart emerged from the house, carrying a box. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw a flicker of regret in his gaze before he quickly looked away. Jennifer followed, leaning heavily on Cole's arm. She glanced up at my window, her expression unreadable. As I watched them load the truck, memories flooded back. The day we moved in, our housewarming party, the countless dinners and lazy Sundays we'd shared. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I making a mistake? The doorbell rang, jolting me from my reverie. I opened it to find Sarah standing there, a bottle of champagne in one hand and a determined look on her face. "I figured you could use some moral support," she said, stepping inside. I smiled gratefully. "You have no idea." We sat in the kitchen, watching the proceedings through the window. Sarah poured us each a glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," she toasted. As we clinked glasses, Bart appeared in the doorway. "Natalie, can we talk? Just for a minute?" Sarah squeezed my hand and discreetly left the room. I steeled myself, facing Bart. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He ran a hand through his hair, looking lost. I wanted to say I'm sorry, for everything. I never meant for things to end up like this." I felt a lump in my throat. "Neither did I, Bart. But we can't go back." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I know. I just hope, someday, you can forgive me." As he turned to leave, I called out, "Bart?" He paused, looking back. "I hope you find happiness," I said softly. A sad smile crossed his face. "You too, Nat. You deserve it." And then he was gone. I watched from the window as the moving truck pulled away, taking with it the remnants of my old life. Sarah reappeared, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "How are you feeling?" I took a deep breath. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Relieved, sad, scared, all of the above." She nodded understandingly. "That's normal. But you know what? You're free now. This is your chance to rediscover yourself." As her words sank in, I felt a spark of excitement ignite within me. She was right. For the first time in years, I was truly free to live life on my own terms. We spent the rest of the day reimagining the house. We moved furniture, discussed paint colors, and planned a complete overhaul of the guest room, Jennifer's old room, into a home office. As evening fell, we sat on the patio, enjoying the peaceful silence. Sarah's phone buzzed, and she grinned as she read the message. "So," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye, "remember my colleague, David? The one I told you about?" I nodded, curious. "Well, he's been asking about you. Wanted to know if you might be interested in grabbing coffee sometime." I felt a flutter of nervousness and excitement. "I don't know, Sarah. Isn't it too soon?" She shook her head. "It's just coffee, Nat. No pressure, but it might be nice to remember that there are good men out there, men who will put you first." I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. "You know what? Tell him I'd love to." As Sarah tapped out a reply, I gazed out at the garden, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. This house, once a symbol of my failed marriage, now represented a new beginning. It was mine, truly mine, to fill with new memories, new friendships, and perhaps someday new love. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the end of one chapter and the exciting beginning of another. Whatever the future held, I was ready to face it head-on, stronger and wiser than before. As the sun set on this tumultuous day, I realized that sometimes the end of one dream is simply the beginning of a better one, and I couldn't wait to see what this new dream had in store for me.
Birthdays are supposed to be celebrations, not funerals for 30-year marriages. Yet here I sat, staring at divorce papers wrapped in silver gift paper, complete with a gaudy bow on top. Frank always did have a twisted sense of humor. I'm Elsie, and my husband just told me he wants to start a new life. Without me. On my 55th birthday. "I think it's best if we handle this amicably," Frank said, his voice carrying that same measured tone he used when explaining complex engineering problems to clients. "I've already spoken with my lawyer. He's drawn up a fair settlement." The restaurant buzzed around us, other diners laughing and clinking glasses. A waiter hovered nearby, probably wondering why the woman at table 12 was clutching unopened gift wrap like it might explode. Fair? The word tasted bitter. You ambush me at dinner and call this fair? Frank adjusted his collar, a nervous tic I'd noticed over 3 decades of marriage. I thought a public place would help keep things civil. Civil? I laughed, drawing stares from nearby tables. Like serving divorce papers for dessert? Lower your voice, Elsie. People are starting to stare. Let them. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against hardwood. 30 years, Frank. 30 years of cooking your meals, ironing your shirts, supporting your career. And this is how you thank me? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. I've given you everything you could want. A beautiful home, financial security. Everything except loyalty. The words shot out before I could stop them. His face tightened. This isn't about loyalty. We've grown apart. You must have noticed. Of course I'd noticed. The late nights at work, the mysterious business trips, the new cologne he'd started wearing 6 months ago. I wasn't stupid, just willfully blind. Is there someone else? Frank's silence was answer enough. Who is she? That's not important right now. He reached for his wallet, pulling out crisp bills. Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be. I stood up, my hands shaking. You're right about one thing, Frank. This doesn't need to be ugly. I picked up my water glass. It can be spectacular. The water hit his face before he could react, drawing gasps from nearby diners. As it dripped down his expensive shirt, I saw something I'd never seen before, fear in his eyes. Happy birthday to me, I said, dropping the empty glass on the table. And Frank, tell your lawyer to expect a call from mine. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high, leaving behind 3 decades of marriage and a very wet soon-to-be ex-husband. My phone buzzed in my purse, probably Megan calling to wish me happy birthday. Our daughter didn't know yet. Nobody did. In the parking lot, my composure cracked. Tears burned my eyes as I fumbled with my car keys, but I refused to let them fall. Frank wanted amicable. He should have thought of that before gift-wrapping my heartbreak. The divorce papers sat in my passenger seat, that ridiculous bow mocking me. I started the engine, my mind already racing with questions. Where would I live? What would I tell our friends? How would Megan react? But beneath the fear and hurt, something else stirred, something that felt dangerously like revenge. Frank thought he could discard me like yesterday's newspaper, start fresh with whoever she was. He thought I'd roll over, take his fair settlement, and disappear quietly. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving behind the restaurant where my marriage ended. Ahead lay uncertainty, fear, and pain, but also possibility. And perhaps, just perhaps, the sweet taste of justice. Happy birthday to me, indeed. Megan's face twisted with rage as she paced my kitchen, her heels clicking against the tile like angry punctuation marks. He did what? I watched her from my seat at the counter, wondering how my daughter had grown into such a fierce defender. The divorce papers lay between us, that gaudy bow now crushed and forgotten. Your father thinks he's being generous, I said, tracing the rim of my coffee mug. He's offering me the house. The house you both own? How magnanimous of him. Megan stopped pacing, her marketing executive persona slipping into place. What about his pension, the investments, the vacation property? According to these papers, those stay with him, for his retirement plans. His retirement plans? Megan's laugh could have cut glass. I'm calling him. Megan, don't... But she already had her phone out, jabbing at the screen. The call connected on speaker, Frank's voice filling the kitchen. Megan, I'm in a meeting. Cancel it. We need to talk about what you did to Mom. A heavy sigh crackled through the speaker. Your mother and I are handling this like adults. I'd appreciate if you'd stay out of it. Stay out of it? Megan's knuckles whitened around the phone. You served her divorce papers on her birthday, in a restaurant. It was a controlled environment. It was cruel, Dad. And the settlement, it's insulting. The settlement is more than fair. His voice took on that condescending tone I'd grown to hate. Your mother hasn't worked in 30 years. The house gives her security. The house gives you an easy out, Megan snapped. What about the money you've been moving around lately? Those new accounts Mom doesn't know about? The silence that followed was deafening. I straightened in my chair, watching my daughter's face carefully. What accounts? Lucas noticed some irregularities when he was helping you with your taxes last month, Megan said, her eyes locked on the phone. Want to explain those, Dad? Your husband had no right to go through my personal finances. Frank's voice had lost its patronizing edge, replaced by something sharper. And you have no right to interfere in matters between your mother and me. Someone needs to look out for her interests, since you clearly aren't. I'm done discussing this. The line went dead. Megan set the phone down carefully, too carefully. Mom, there's something you need to know. Lucas found... Not yet. I stood up, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. First, I need a lawyer. Then we can talk about what Lucas found. I have a name, someone who specializes in high-conflict divorces. She pulled out a business card, sliding it across the counter. She's expensive, but she's the best. I picked up the card, running my thumb over the embossed letters. Your father will be furious if I challenge the settlement. Good. Megan's smile was all teeth. Let him be furious. Let him see what happens when he underestimates you. Looking at my daughter, I saw myself at her age, fierce, determined, ready to take on the world. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost that fire. Or maybe I'd just buried it under years of compromise and careful peacekeeping. There's something else, Megan said, her expression softening. Lucas and I want you to stay with us until this is sorted out. The guest room's already made up. I couldn't impose. It's not imposing. It's family. She reached across the counter, squeezing my hand. Besides, it'll drive Dad crazy knowing you're not sitting at home waiting for his next move. For the first time since that disastrous birthday dinner, I felt something like hope. Frank thought he had me cornered, relegated to the role of discarded wife, accepting whatever scraps he deigned to offer. He'd forgotten who I was before I became Mrs. Frank Anderson. Time to remind him. I picked up the divorce papers, noting how my hands no longer shook. Call the lawyer, set up a meeting. I met Megan's gaze, seeing my own determination reflected back. Let's show your father what happens when he mistakes kindness for weakness. The photograph landed on my lawyer's desk with the weight of a bomb. Lucas had found it buried in Frank's cloud storage. My husband and a woman I didn't recognize, intimately entangled at what looked like a hotel bar. The date stamp showed 3 months ago, during what Frank had called a critical business conference in Phoenix. Her name is Grace Matthews, Lucas said, his usual calm demeanor tinged with disgust. She was a consultant at Frank's company before he retired, 35 years old. The age hit me like a physical blow, 20 years younger than me. I stared at her glossy, dark hair, her perfectly manicured hands on my husband's arm, the way she looked at him like he was her future. There's more, Megan added, pulling out her tablet. She's been appointed to 3 different tech company boards in the last 6 months, companies Frank had connections with. My lawyer, Catherine Walsh, studied the information with sharp eyes. And the accounts you mentioned? Lucas pulled up several spreadsheets. Frank's been moving significant amounts into offshore accounts. Started about 8 months ago, right around when Grace Matthews began her meteoric rise in the industry. He's been planning this, I said, my voice hollow. All those late nights, the business trips, the secret phone calls. He wasn't just having an affair. He was building her career. With your marital assets, Catherine noted, typing rapidly, this changes everything. The settlement he offered isn't just unfair, it's fraudulent. A memory surfaced. Frank at our kitchen table, asking me to sign papers for what he called retirement planning. I'd trusted him completely, never questioning, never doubting. What's our next move? Megan asked, her hand squeezing mine. Catherine's smile was predatory. We file for emergency injunctions on all accounts. Then we request a forensic accountant to trace every penny he's moved. And most importantly, she tapped the photograph. We make it clear we know about Grace. My phone buzzed. A text from Frank. We need to talk. Dinner tonight? He knows we're here, I said, showing them the message. He's trying to control the situation. Good, Catherine replied. Let him think he still can. Meet him for dinner, record everything. But first, she handed me a stack of papers. Sign these. We're filing them this afternoon. Later, at an upscale restaurant Frank had chosen, I watched him fidget with his wedding ring, the one he still wore, despite everything. His tell when he was about to lie. Elsie, be reasonable, he started. This hostile approach isn't like you. No? I sipped my wine, savoring the moment. How would you know what I'm like, Frank? You've been too busy with Grace Matthews to notice. The color drained from his face. Who told you? Does it matter? What matters is what you've been doing with our money, our future. I can explain the board appointments, the offshore accounts, the hotel rooms. Each question hit him like a slap. Save your explanations for the forensic accountant. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You're making a mistake. I offered you a clean break, a comfortable life. Don't throw that away for spite. Spite? I met his gaze steadily. No, Frank, this isn't spite. This is justice. You'll get nothing, he snarled. I'll fight you every step. Like you fought for those board positions for Grace? I stood, dropping my napkin on the table. I wonder what the ethics committees would think about that. Fear flickered in his eyes, real fear, like at my birthday dinner. But this time, I didn't just see it. I savored it. You taught me something, Frank, I said, gathering my purse. You taught me that sometimes the people we trust the most deserve it the least. I'll remember that lesson. And so will you. I left him there, staring at his untouched meal, knowing his perfectly planned future was unraveling thread by thread. In my purse, my phone recorded every word, every threat, every admission. The game had changed. Frank thought he was dealing with the same compliant wife who'd signed papers without reading them, who'd believed every lie, who'd put his needs first for 30 years. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. The email arrived at 3 a.m, sent from an address I didn't recognize. One line of text followed by attachments. You should know what you're up against. I clicked through photos of Frank and Grace at various events, each more intimate than the last. Then came the documents, bank statements, property records, incorporation papers. Grace's name appeared everywhere, woven through Frank's business dealings like a poisonous thread. My hands shook as I forwarded everything to Catherine. Sleep was impossible now, so I wandered into Megan and Lucas's kitchen, where the midnight silence felt less oppressive than my temporary bedroom. Mom? Lucas appeared in the doorway, laptop under his arm. I heard you up. Anonymous email, I said, gesturing to my phone. Someone's feeding us information. He set his laptop on the counter, pulling up files. I've been tracking Frank's digital footprint. There's something else you need to see. The screen showed a real estate listing, a modern penthouse downtown, purchased 3 months ago through a shell company. The kind of place Frank always claimed was wastefully extravagant. It gets worse, Lucas said quietly. Check the move-in date. Next week, the same week Frank had insisted we needed to finalize the divorce. He's been planning this for months, I whispered. Years, maybe. There's more, Lucas hesitated. The shell company? Grace is listed as co-owner. The kitchen suddenly felt too small. I grabbed my car keys. Mom, where are you going? To see my house, while it's still mine. Lucas grabbed his jacket. I'm coming with you. The drive was silent. Our family home emerged from the darkness, its familiar outline now seeming false, like a stage set hiding ugly truths. My key still worked. Inside, everything looked normal. Family photos, collected memories, 30 years of life together. But something was off. The study, I realized, heading upstairs. Frank's private space had always been off limits. His sanctuary for work, he'd called it. Now I knew better. The door was locked, but Lucas made quick work of it. Inside, Frank's usually immaculate desk was chaos. Papers everywhere, drawers left open. He's been here tonight, Lucas said, examining the mess. Looking for something specific. I started sorting through papers. Muscle memory from years of organizing Frank's life taking over. Bank statements, investment records, a half-empty bottle of expensive scotch I'd never seen before. Then I found it, buried under tax forms, a handwritten letter from Grace. Frank, everything's ready. The boards are secured, the accounts are clean. After the divorce, we'll have full control. She'll never know how long we've been planning this. All your careful grooming of me is about to pay off. The words blurred. I sat heavily in Frank's chair, the leather still warm from his recent presence. Mom? Lucas's voice seemed far away. He didn't just betray me, I said, my voice strange to my own ears. He used me. All those years I supported him, managed his life, helped him climb the corporate ladder. I was just a stepping stone. Lucas gathered the papers quickly, taking photos with his phone. This is evidence. Catherine can use this. No. I stood up, something cold and clear crystallizing in my chest. Not yet. Frank's looking for these papers for a reason. They're valuable to him. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to stop playing defense. I picked up Frank's scotch bottle, studying it. He taught Grace everything she knows about business, but he taught me everything about him. A car door slammed outside. Headlights swept across the windows. He's back, Lucas whispered. I grabbed the letters and key documents, leaving the rest scattered. Good. Let him wonder what's missing. Let him worry about what I know. We slipped out the back door as Frank's key turned in the front lock. In the car, Lucas looked at me with concern. Are you okay? I watched my house, Frank's house, disappear in the rearview mirror. No, but I will be. Because now I know exactly what kind of game we're playing. And for the first time, I was ready to play to win. The art studio smelled of turpentine and possibility. Megan had insisted I take these classes, claiming I needed something for myself. What she really meant was I needed somewhere to be that wasn't her guest room, obsessing over Frank's betrayal. Your strokes are too controlled, my instructor said, studying my canvas. Let go of the precision. Feel the emotion. Easier said than done. 30 years of measuring my words, controlling my reactions, being the perfect corporate wife, it becomes a habit. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Meeting at Riverside Cafe in 30 minutes. Come alone. Gee, Grace. My hands trembled, smearing red paint across the canvas like a wound. I need to go, I told the instructor, already reaching for my bag. The cafe was busy. Smart choice on her part. Public enough to feel safe, noisy enough for privacy. Grace sat at a corner table looking exactly like her photos. Polished, poised, younger than my marriage. Thank you for coming, Elsie. Her smile was practiced, professional. I thought it was time we met. I sat down, noting how she'd positioned herself to watch the door. Why? Because Frank is going to destroy both of us if we let him. That wasn't what I expected. Funny, from the letters I found, you two seemed quite cozy. Letters can lie. She slid a folder across the table. Like these board appointments he arranged for me. They come with strings, and evidence of securities fraud. I didn't touch the folder. Why tell me this? Because he's setting me up to take the fall. Her perfect composure cracked slightly. The offshore accounts, the irregular trades, everything's in my name. When the SEC investigates, and they will, I'll be the scapegoat. While Frank walks away clean, I finished, pieces clicking into place, with my money and your reputation. He's better at this game than either of us realized. She leaned forward, but together. Stop. I held up my hand. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. You helped him betray me. I did. No denial, no excuse. And now I'm helping you destroy him. Take the folder, Elsie. Use it. My phone buzzed again. Frank this time. Where are you? We need to talk about the house papers. Grace's eyes flickered to the message. He's getting desperate. The SEC's starting their preliminary inquiry next week. I stood up, leaving the folder untouched. Handle your own mess. He'll win, she called after me. He always wins. Outside, the autumn air felt thick with possibilities. I called Catherine. Grace Matthews just tried to make a deal, I said when she answered. Something about SEC investigations and fraud evidence. Don't touch anything she offers, Catherine warned. It could be a trap. I know. I watched Grace through the cafe window, seeing not a manipulative homewrecker, but another of Frank's carefully positioned pawns. But what if we let her think I did? That evening, at my art class's open studio hours, I stood before a fresh canvas. The instructor's words echoed, let go of the precision, feel the emotion. I thought of Frank's betrayal, of Grace's desperation, of 30 years reduced to legal documents and hidden accounts. My brush moved without conscious thought, spreading dark colors across white space. Mom? Megan's voice behind me. That's intense. I stepped back, seeing my painting through her eyes, chaos and anger and pain made visible, not precise, not controlled, not safe. Frank called me today, Megan said quietly. He's worried about you. Says you're not thinking clearly. I laughed, harsh and genuine. He should be worried, but not about my clarity. My phone lit up with another message from Grace. Time's running out. What's your answer? I studied my painting, all that contained rage finally breaking free. Then I typed, meet me tomorrow, same place. Bring everything you have. Mom? Megan touched my arm. What are you planning? I picked up my brush again, adding one final streak of red across the canvas. I'm done being a pawn, sweetheart. It's time to play like a queen. The paint looked like blood in the studio's harsh lights. Good, because one way or another, someone was going to bleed. The boardroom at Catherine's law office felt like a tomb. Frank sat across from me, Grace beside him, both wearing expressions of practiced concern. The SEC documents lay between us like landmines. This is a mistake, Elsie, Frank said, his voice carrying that familiar patronizing tone. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. I studied the man I'd loved for 30 years, searching for any trace of the person I thought I knew. Emotion? Like the kind that made you forge my signature on those transfer documents? His facade cracked slightly. That's a serious accusation. Everything in these files is serious. I pushed the documents toward him. Securities fraud, money laundering, creative accounting that would make Bernie Madoff blush. Grace shifted uncomfortably. Frank's hand twitched toward hers, then stopped. The gesture wasn't lost on me. You're still trying to protect her, I said quietly, even now when she's helped me build this case against you. His head snapped toward Grace, who paled visibly. What? Don't act surprised, Frank. My voice stayed steady, though my hands shook under the table. Did you really think she'd take the fall for you? That she'd sacrifice herself for love? Grace? His voice held a dangerous edge. She straightened, mask slipping into place. It's business, Frank. You taught me that. The look he gave her could have frozen hell. Then he smiled, that same smile he'd worn when serving me divorce papers on my birthday. Interesting play, he said, standing. But you've overlooked something crucial. He pulled out his phone, tapped briefly, then set it on the table. Check your email, Catherine. My lawyer frowned, opening her laptop. Her sharp intake of breath made my stomach drop. What is it? I asked. He's filed a countersuit, Catherine said slowly, alleging you knew about and approved all financial transactions, with documentation. Impossible. The renovation contracts, Frank cut in smoothly. The charity board minutes, all those papers you signed without reading, trusting your loving husband to handle the details. His smile widened. Your signature's on everything, darling, and unlike mine, they're all authentic. The room spun slightly. All those years of blind trust, of signing whatever he put in front of me, of playing the supportive wife. You'll go down with me, I managed. No, Elsie. I'll weather this storm with my young, naive protege who was led astray by my manipulative, soon-to-be ex-wife. He gathered his papers carefully. The board members know me. They'll believe what's easier to accept, that a bitter woman is seeking revenge, not that their trusted colleague orchestrated fraud. Grace sat frozen, her ambitious future crumbling visibly. You're bluffing, I whispered. Try me. He headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Elsie? The art studio called. They're concerned about your recent, aggressive works. Apparently, my worried calls about your mental state made quite an impression. The door closed behind him with terrible finality. He's thought of everything, Grace said numbly. He always does. Catherine was already typing frantically, damage control mode engaged, but I barely heard her strategy suggestions. All I could see was Frank's smile, the same one he'd worn at our wedding, at Megan's birth, at countless dinner parties where I'd played the perfect corporate wife. My phone buzzed, Megan asking how the meeting went. I couldn't answer. Couldn't tell her that her father had just outmaneuvered us all. Couldn't admit that 30 years of trust had become the weapon of my own destruction. What do we do now? Grace asked, looking as lost as I felt. I stood up, legs unsteady. I need air. In the hallway, I caught my reflection in a window. Gray streaked hair, lines earned from years of smiling at Frank's jokes, wearing Frank's choices, being Frank's wife. My phone buzzed again. A text from Frank. The house papers need your signature by tomorrow. Let's not make this messier than it needs to be. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching the city below continue its normal rhythm, unaware that my world was imploding. Then I straightened, remembering my latest painting, chaos and rage and something else, something that looked like freedom. Frank had thought of everything, almost everything. The annual tech industry gala buzzed with artificial cheer, a perfect stage for what was about to unfold. I adjusted my black evening gown, the one Frank always said was too bold, and watched him work the room, Grace at his side like a trophy. Lucas appeared beside me, champagne in hand. The USB drive is planted in his laptop. Megan's got the presentation queued up. I checked my phone. One new message from Catherine. SEC team standing by, give the signal. Frank caught my eye across the room, his smile faltering slightly. He excused himself from his group, making his way over. Elsie, I didn't expect to see you here. I'm still on the charity board, Frank. Remember? All those papers you had me sign? His jaw tightened. We should talk privately. Actually, I gestured to the stage. I believe you're about to give your retirement speech. Don't let me keep you. He studied my face, searching for tells he'd learned over 30 years. I gave him nothing. The chairman called Frank to the stage. Applause rippled through the room as he took his position behind the podium, Grace beaming from the front row. Distinguished colleagues, he began, after 30 years in this industry. The presentation screen behind him flickered. His carefully prepared slides disappeared, replaced by financial documents, email exchanges, and photos. All the evidence we'd gathered, now displayed for his peers to see. Frank faltered mid-sentence, turning to look. His face went ash white. Keep going, Frank. I called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. Tell them about your retirement plans, the offshore accounts, the manipulated board appointments, the fraud you plan to pin on your mistress. Grace stood up sharply, her perfect composure cracking. You said you'd protect me. He lies, Grace. That's what he does. I moved toward the stage. He used my signatures to build his empire, used your ambition to create his scapegoat, and thought he could discard us both when it suited him. Security guards appeared at the doors. Not hotel security, but SEC agents. Frank saw them too. His hands gripped the podium. This is a mistake, he announced to the shocked crowd. My wife is unwell. Your wife, I cut in, has been working with federal investigators for weeks. Those signatures you relied on? Every document dated after your affair began is now evidence of coercion in a federal fraud investigation. The room erupted in whispers. Board members stepped back from Frank like he was contagious. Grace slipped toward the exit but found her path blocked by agents. You can't prove anything, Frank hissed, but his voice shook. Check your laptop, dear. The one you use for private trading. It's amazing what a forensic accountant can find with full access. His eyes widened. Finally, he understood. You taught me well, Frank. All those years watching you manipulate people, watching you build your house of cards. I smiled, his smile, the one he'd worn while serving me divorce papers. I learned. The SEC agents moved in. Grace was already in tears, spilling everything to save herself. Board members huddled with their lawyers, and Frank stood frozen, watching 30 years of careful planning collapse. The house papers, he said quietly as agents approached the stage. You never signed them. No, I didn't. I removed my wedding ring, placing it on the podium. Consider it my retirement gift to you. They led him away in handcuffs, past shocked colleagues and flashing phones, past Megan, who stood straight-backed, her father's daughter in strength if not in character, past the life we'd built on lies and careful signatures. In the chaos, Lucas touched my arm. You okay? I watched Frank disappear through the doors, shoulders slumped, no longer the giant who had dominated my life. I thought this would feel more like victory. Maybe it's not about winning, he said quietly. Maybe it's about surviving. My phone buzzed, Catherine confirming that everything was proceeding as planned. The legal machinery would grind forward, justice would be served, and I was free. The taste wasn't exactly sweet, but it wasn't bitter either. It tasted like truth, like strength, like tomorrow. The gallery hummed with opening night energy as visitors moved between my paintings. Each canvas told a piece of my story: rage, betrayal, rebirth, though the patrons saw only abstract emotion in bold strokes. The series is called Signatures, I heard the curator explain to a group. Each piece explores themes of identity and power. I touched the simple silver pendant at my throat, my first purchase with my own money after the divorce settlement. Frank's assets were frozen pending his trial, but my share had been secured, along with something far more valuable: my freedom. That one's my favorite, Megan said, pointing to a particular piece. Dark lines tangled with splashes of crimson, but at the center, a small spark of gold broke through. I'd painted it the day Frank's plea deal was finalized. Mine too, I admitted, though I'm not sure why. I do. She squeezed my hand. It's the first one where you let the light in. A commotion near the entrance drew our attention. Grace stood there, looking less polished than during her testimony that had helped convict Frank. She spotted me and moved forward, ignoring the curious stares. I wasn't sure you'd come, I said when she reached us. I almost didn't. She studied the painting before us, the one where gold broke through darkness. The board positions fell through. All of them. I know. Was it worth it? Burning everything down? I considered her question carefully. Ask me again in 10 years. She nodded, understanding what I couldn't quite say. We'd both lost and won in different ways. She turned to leave, then paused. Frank asked about you, in prison. What did you tell him? That you're having an art show. A ghost of her old smile appeared. He wouldn't understand what that means, would he? After she left, Lucas appeared with champagne. Sold another one, the big piece from your angry period? I laughed, actually laughed. Is that what we're calling it? Better than the month Mom went nuclear on Dad, Megan quipped. The curator approached, beaming. Elsie, there's someone who'd like to discuss commissioning a series for their corporate offices. Go, Megan urged. Be brilliant. I moved through the gallery, noting how differently I carried myself now. No more careful steps, no more measured words. The woman who had signed papers without reading them was gone. Near the back wall hung my latest work, still untitled. Unlike the others, its colors were neither dark nor light, but something in between. Complex, uncertain, real. Like life after revenge. My phone buzzed. A message from Catherine. Judge denied Frank's appeal. It's really over. Over. Such a simple word for such a complicated truth. A young woman stood studying my untitled piece, her expression thoughtful. I can't decide if it's about endings or beginnings, she said as I approached. I touched my silver pendant, thinking of Frank in his prison cell, of Grace rebuilding her life, of Megan and Lucas's steadfast support, of my own reflection, finally recognizable again. Maybe it's both, I replied. Maybe that's the point. She nodded slowly. The technique here, it's unusual. Like you're signing your name across the whole canvas, over and over, but in colors instead of letters. I smiled, remembering all those years of signing Frank's papers, of writing his name beside mine, of letting my signature become a weapon he wielded. Sometimes, I said, you have to sign your name 1,000 times before you remember who you are. The gallery lights dimmed slightly, a signal that opening night was winding down. Soon Megan and Lucas would take me to dinner, and tomorrow I'd return to my studio, where blank canvases waited. Frank had taught me about power, about signatures, about careful plans and hidden motives. But he'd never understood the most important lesson. Sometimes the strongest signature isn't written at all. Sometimes it's painted in light breaking through darkness, in truth shattering lies, in the simple act of standing in a gallery surrounded by your own voice, finally and fully heard.
I stared at Tom's back as he walked away, his sister Nancy trailing behind him like an obedient lapdog. Maggie, taking care of your mother-in-law is your job while we're gone. Don't mess it up, he tossed over his shoulder, without even a glance in my direction. As the front door slammed shut, I let out a long breath, my shoulders sagging. 4 weeks alone with Caroline, Tom's bedridden, mute mother. The same woman who had treated me with thinly veiled disdain from the moment I'd married her son 5 years ago. I trudged up the stairs to Caroline's room, dreading the next month. She lay motionless on the bed, her pale, wrinkled face expressionless as always. "Well, Caroline, looks like it's just you and me," I muttered, receiving no response. The first week passed in a blur of monotony. I fed Caroline, bathed her, changed her bedding, all while she stared blankly ahead, never uttering a sound. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. On the 8th day, something shifted. As I leaned over to adjust Caroline's pillows, her bony hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. I gasped, meeting her piercing blue eyes for the first time. "Enough of this charade, Maggie," she rasped, her voice rough from disuse. "We have work to do." I could only gape at her, my mind reeling. Caroline pushed herself upright, swinging her legs over the edge of the bed. "But how? You've been—" "Pretending," she finished, a wry smile tugging at her lips, playing the helpless old woman to avoid dealing with my wretched family. As she began to explain, revealing a web of deceit and cruelty I'd never imagined, a fierce determination took root within me. Tom's betrayal ran deeper than I'd ever known, but now with Caroline's help, I would unravel every last secret. The game was on. As Caroline's revelations sank in, a wave of emotions crashed over me. Shock, anger, betrayal. I had always known Tom's family was a little off, but this was a whole new level of depravity. "How could you let them treat you like that?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fury. "You're their mother, their own flesh and blood." Caroline's expression hardened. At first, I tried to fight back, but they slowly stripped me of everything. My money, my power, even my dignity. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. Her eyes bored into mine, icy and resolute. "That's why we have to stop them, Maggie, before they do the same to you." A shiver ran down my spine at her ominous words. Was that Tom's plan all along? To isolate me, make me dependent on him and his vile family? The thought made me sick. "Start from the beginning," I urged Caroline. "I need to know everything." And so she told me a sordid tale of greed, manipulation, and outright cruelty that made my blood boil. How her late husband's inheritance had sparked a vicious power struggle within the family. How Tom and Nancy had slowly turned against her, stripping her assets and forcing her into a life of subservience, all under the guise of caring for their poor, helpless mother. By the time Caroline finished, hot tears of rage stung my eyes. "Those bastards," I spat, "using their own mother like that." A gnarled hand gripped mine, startling me. "That's why we have to fight back," Caroline stated, her voice laced with steel. "They won't see it coming." A plan began to form, pieces slotting into place like a twisted puzzle. We would follow Tom and his wretched family to Maui, catch them in the act of whatever new scheme they were hatching. And when we did, justice would be ours. Over the next few days, Caroline and I hatched our plan. She knew someone who could help us, an old friend named Mark who used to work as a private investigator. "Are you sure we can trust him?" I asked warily as Caroline dialed the number. She shot me a reassuring look. "Mark's one of the few decent people left in this world. He'll help us bring those snakes down." The phone call was brief, but by the time Caroline hung up, a sly grin had crept across her weathered features. "He's in. Said he's been itching for some juicy drama to sink his teeth into." A surprising burst of laughter escaped my lips. Who would have thought sweet, demure Maggie Owens would be plotting an elaborate revenge scheme? If Tom could see me now— The thought of my treacherous husband sobered me instantly. Caroline must have noticed my change in demeanor, because she reached out and gave my hand a comforting squeeze. "I know it hurts, dear. Believe me, I understand the pain of having your own family betray you." Her eyes hardened. "But that's exactly why we have to do this, to show them we're not just a couple of helpless old ladies to be manipulated and cast aside." Her words lit a fire in my belly. She was right. For too long, I had meekly accepted the crumbs Tom and his vicious brood deigned to toss my way. But not anymore. This time, we would be the ones calling the shots. Mark arrived 2 days later, a rumpled but kind-looking man in his 40s. As Caroline introduced us, I studied him carefully, looking for any signs of dishonesty or ulterior motives, but his warm brown eyes crinkled with genuine compassion as he shook my hand. "Don't you worry, Maggie," he said in a gentle southern drawl. "We're going to nail those lying snakes, but good." And so we got to work. poring over flight manifests and hotel reservations, mapping out every step of Tom's upcoming trip to Maui. With each detail we uncovered, my resolve solidified like steel. Finally, the day arrived. As I stood in the kitchen watching the black Suburban pull away, Tom's stupid smug face visible through the tinted windows, I felt a surge of vicious satisfaction. Let him enjoy this little vacation. It would be his last taste of freedom before everything came crashing down around him. I turned to find Caroline and Mark watching me, twin expressions of grim determination etched on their faces. Time to go hunting. With Tom and his family now en route to Maui, the real work began. Mark sprang into action, a whirlwind of phone calls and computer searches as he dug up every scrap of intel on their targets. "This Tom fella sure loves his luxury resorts," he muttered, scribbling notes on a legal pad. "But we can use that against him." Caroline and I huddled close, watching with bated breath as Mark cross-referenced hotel listings and flight schedules. Finally, he circled something with a triumphant flourish. "Got it! They're staying at the Grand Wailea Resort. Pricey place, but that means more staff to bribe for information." He shot us a conspiratorial wink. A sly grin tugged at Caroline's lips. "Excellent work, Mark. Now about getting us over there discreetly." By the time Tom's sniveling voice crackled over the answering machine with some half-baked excuse about needing to extend their stay, we were ready. Fake identities, meticulously forged documents, Mark had covered every base with the same care as a master artist crafting his next masterpiece. The morning we left, I stood in the driveway, squinting against the harsh Arizona sun as I drank in the sight of my quaint little house. Once upon a time, it had represented everything I'd ever wanted: a loving home, a caring husband, maybe even children someday. Now it was just another empty facade, a monument to the lies my life had become. Tossing my suitcase into the trunk with a decisive thunk, I slid into the back seat beside Caroline. Her face was set in stony determination, any traces of frailty or fear utterly banished. This was a woman who had stared into the depths of betrayal and emerged emboldened, ready to face any challenge head-on. As Mark peeled out of the driveway, I twisted in my seat for one last glimpse of the house rapidly disappearing behind us. A strange sense of finality washed over me, as if I were shedding an old, tarnished skin and being reborn into something new, something stronger, uncompromising, unafraid. This time, there would be no more lies, no more hiding in the shadows while others schemed and plotted in the light. This time, the snakes would get their just desserts. Maui was every bit as beautiful as the glossy travel brochures promised: sun-drenched beaches, swaying palms, and crystal-clear waters that seemed to beckon weary souls. Too bad we weren't there for a vacation. Mark had booked us a modest room at a different resort, far enough away to avoid any accidental run-ins with Tom's crew. Not that they'd recognize us anyway, thanks to his meticulously crafted fake identities. "First order of business," he said, tossing a stack of crisp bills on the rickety table, "is getting eyes and ears inside the Grand Wailea." Caroline's eyes glinted with determination. "Leave that to me, dear. I have a few tricks left up my sleeve." True to her word, within 48 hours, she'd made some very lucrative friends among the resort staff: a maid, a bartender, even the concierge. All it took was flashing a little cash, and they were more than happy to keep their eyes peeled for any suspicious behavior from the Owens family. The first report came 3 days later, delivered in a hushed voice over burner phones like we were deep undercover spies. Becca, the maid, had spotted Tom getting awfully cozy with a pretty young blonde by the adult pool, hand-holding, whispered endearments, the works. White-hot rage lanced through me at the mental image. So not only was the bastard cheating, he was bold enough to do it right under his family's noses? I fought the urge to hurl the phone across the room as Caroline flashed me a sympathetic look. "There's more," Becca continued in a trembling voice. "I overheard Nancy and that trollop Becca talking about some kind of plan to cut you out, Maggie, make it look like you just up and left Tom high and dry so they could take the house." The room seemed to spin around me as the weight of her words sank in. So that's what this whole sick charade had been about, robbing me of everything I had left, leaving me destitute and alone. Tears of fury stung my eyes as Caroline reached out to grip my arm, steadying me. "Breathe. Maggie," she murmured. "We've got them right where we want them." Taking a shuddering breath, I forced myself to nod. Caroline was right. Panicking now would only play right into their hands. We had to stay focused, gather every last shred of evidence to crush them utterly. Over the next few days, the calls kept coming. Sordid details of Tom's affair, overheard conversations about their insidious grasping my hand in a vice-like grip. "Are you ready, dear? Once we start down this road, there's no turning back." Meeting her blazing gaze, I felt something shift deep inside, a sense of unshakable purpose, of being in the dead calm eye of the storm before all hell broke loose. This was it, the moment everything changed. "Let's do this," I said, the words ringing with a cold finality. Tomorrow, the Owens family would reap what they'd sown, and this time, I'd be the one dealing the blows. The next evening, showtime arrived. Mark had managed to score us a reservation at Ferraro's, one of the ritziest restaurants at the Grand Wailea, the perfect place to spring our trap. As the valet whisked our rental car away, I smoothed my hands over the slinky black dress Caroline had insisted I wear. "You want them squirming, dear," she'd said with a wicked glint in her eye. "Give them something to look at." The maitre d' led us through the opulent dining room, weaving between tables filled with vacationing millionaires obliviously enjoying their overpriced meals. My heart was pounding a staccato rhythm in my chest as we approached our destination, a semi-secluded alcove near the back, perfectly positioned for our little encounter. They were already there. Tom, resplendent in a tailored linen suit that probably cost more than my car. Nancy, draped in gaudy jewels befitting a faded aristocrat. And beside them, the pretty young blonde I recognized from the photos, Becca, Tom's latest conquest. I felt Caroline tense beside me as we approached, no doubt fighting the urge to rush forward and unleash decades of pent-up fury. Mark's reassuring hand on my elbow was the only thing keeping me grounded. Tom was the first to notice us, his brow furrowing in confusion that quickly morphed into ill-concealed panic. "And Maggie? What are you doing here?" Well, if it isn't the happy family," I drawled, surprised by the biting sarcasm dripping from my words. "Enjoying your vacation, Tom?" He opened and closed his mouth like a gasping fish, shooting panicked glances between me and the oblivious Becca. Nancy, never one to be upstaged, puffed out her bony chest in a pitiful attempt at bravado. "And just what is the meaning of this, Maggie?" she snapped, lips curling into a condescending sneer. "Barging in on our family holiday, putting on such a shameful display. Can it, Nancy?" The words sliced through her tirade like a hot knife through butter. We both know this is no family vacation. With a deft flick of my wrist, I spread the damning photos across the crisp linen tablecloth. Tom draped all over Becca by the pool, whispering into her ear, his face drained of color as his mistress's pretty features contorted in shock and revulsion. You've been watching us?" he choked out, hands trembling. A cruel smile twisted my lips. "Among other things, care to explain to your little friend here about your plan to steal my home? My inheritance?" Becca's head whipped around, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and bewildered hurt. "Tom, what is she talking about?" The question seemed to catalyze something within him. Suddenly he was on his feet, fists clenched, a vein pulsing angrily in his forehead. "You stupid little he snarled, seemingly forgetting we were surrounded by gawking onlookers. That's when Caroline made her move. With a spryness that belied her age, she shot out of her seat and seized him by the lapels, slamming him back into his chair with a surprising burst of strength. "Not another word out of you," she hissed, her face a mask of pure venom as she loomed over her cowering son. "You've tormented me for the last time." Tom's eyes bulged in shock and terror as he finally registered the woman restraining him, the same helpless old crone he'd been belittling and demeaning for years. "Mom? But how?" The sickly sweet smile she turned on him then was somehow more chilling than any glare. "What's the matter, Tommy? You look like you've seen a ghost." The shocked silence that fell over our secluded alcove was deafening. Tom stared up at his mother in abject horror, as if she'd grown a second head right before his eyes. Nancy looked equally stunned, her bravado evaporating like smoke. "But you were bedridden," Tom finally sputtered, grasping at straws. "We took care of you, Mother, after Dad died and left everything in shambles." "Don't you dare play the victim with me, Thomas Owens." Caroline spat, her frail body practically vibrating with pent-up rage. Not after what you and your wretched sister did to me." Her piercing gaze swung to Nancy, who shrank back in her chair. "Stripping me of my assets, my dignity, my very identity, all for that blasted inheritance. Did you really think I wouldn't eventually catch on to your game?" It was like a dam had burst. Years of deception, manipulation, and suffering came pouring out in a torrent of recriminations. Caroline laid it all bare. The vicious power struggle that erupted after her husband's death, the slow erosion of her autonomy at the hands of her own children, the utter disregard they'd shown her as a human being. "We did what was best for the family," Nancy attempted feebly, but her protests were swiftly silenced by a withering glare. "Best for the family?" Caroline laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Or best for your own greed? I may be old, but I'm not senile. I know exactly what you two vipers were planning here in Maui." She jerked her chin toward the still scattered photos, Tom and Becca's indiscretions laid bare for all to see. Using this little tramp to cuckold Maggie, make her look unhinged so you could steal her home out from under her, just like you did to me. Becca made a small, pained noise in the back of her throat, tears welling in her wide eyes. Tom reached out a placating hand, but she flinched away, revulsion etched across her delicate features. Is that true?" She turned to me, anguish and betrayal writ large. "Were you just using me to take everything from your wife?" The lost, broken look on Tom's face would have almost been comical if the situation weren't so twisted. His mouth worked soundlessly as he floundered for an excuse, any lie to salvage what was left of his pathetic charade. In the end, he simply slumped back in his chair, a puppet with its strings cut, defeated. Nancy, however, wasn't quite ready to surrender. Rounding on me with bared teeth, she hissed, "You little bitch! After everything we've done for you, putting a roof over your head, clothes on your back." "That's enough." The words sliced through Nancy's vitriol like a blade, cold and utterly devoid of mercy. Straightening to my full height, I met her hateful glare with an icy one of my own. "Your lies and manipulations end here," I stated, each word ringing with finality. "The Maggie you knew, the sweet, naive little doormat, is gone. Don't like it?" I gestured to the surrounding diners, gawking in scandalized fascination. "Too bad. The whole world can see you for what you really are now." A muscle twitched in Nancy's jaw, but she seemed to realize the futility of arguing. Slowly, almost grudgingly, she sank back into her seat in sullen defeat. As I surveyed the shattered remains of the Owens clan, a strange sense of lightness washed over me, as if a crushing weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders after all this time. The anger, the hurt, the years of rage and resentment, it all seemed to melt away in that moment, leaving only a hollow sort of pity in its wake. These were just sad, small people obsessed with wealth and status, to the point of self-destruction. By trying to control me, they'd ultimately lost everything. Their money, their standing, even each other. And in the end, their defeat was entirely of their own making. The flight back from Maui was a blur. Caroline and I huddled together in the emergency exit row, sipping tiny bottles of bourbon and relishing the silence. For once, there were no snakes waiting to strike from the shadows, just the promise of a new beginning. Mark had already made arrangements to handle the legal ramifications of Tom's exposed misdeeds. With his connections and the wealth of evidence we'd gathered, he assured us that the appropriate authorities would be brought into the loop to address any potential criminal charges. As for me, I simply didn't have the energy to even think about pressing charges or going through a lengthy legal battle. I just wanted to move on. The first thing I did when we returned to Arizona was put the house on the market. It didn't take long to find a buyer. Tom's family had done me the favor of selecting a home in a prime neighborhood. As I signed the final paperwork that transferred ownership, I felt an unexpected pang of sadness watching the new owner's excited expressions. "Try not to make the same mistakes I did," I couldn't help but murmur as I handed over the keys. With the house settled, it was time to decide my next steps. Caroline and I spent an evening camped out at a local diner, poring over maps and apartment listings as we tried to figure out our new path. "I was thinking somewhere new," she said, tracing her finger over the map. "A fresh start, away from all these bad memories." I nodded slowly. As much as I'd once loved the idea of settling down in the suburbs, raising a family of my own, that dream felt tainted now. irrevocably tarnished by Tom's betrayal and the upheaval that followed. Maybe it was for the best to leave it all behind, to forge ahead into the unknown. "I'm open to it," I agreed. "Any preferences?" Caroline's eyes took on a distant look as she studied the map. "You know, I've always wanted to see New England in the fall. The changing leaves, the crisp air." She let out a contented sigh. "It seems like it would be a lovely place to plant some new roots." I couldn't help but smile at the image she painted, the two of us surrounded by vibrant autumn splendor, finally at peace after the turmoil we'd endured. A chance to reinvent ourselves in a place where the Owens name meant nothing. New England it is, then. In the weeks that followed, we began making preparations for our new life, selling or donating what little we had left in Arizona, researching potential towns and job prospects in the Northeast. With each day that passed, it became easier to shed the weight of the past and look ahead with a sense of renewal. On the morning we were set to depart, I took one last walk through the empty house. Upstairs, I peeked into the room that had once been mine and Caroline's command center, covered in maps and photographs detailing every minute of our revenge plot. So much had happened within these walls, so much hurt and anger, yes, but also a reckoning long overdue. A bittersweet smile tugged at my lips as I turned away. The past was the past, the slithering shadows forever banished. Whatever lay ahead in New England was still a mystery, but this time I vowed to march forward with open eyes and a fearless heart. After all, we had already faced down the worst the Owens family could throw at us. From here, the path could only lead forward. As I made my way down the stairs one final time, I felt lighter than I had in years, free of the burdens that once weighed me down. Out in the hallway, Caroline was waiting with an expectant look. "Ready, dear?" she asked, a warm, conspiratorial smile curving her lips. Returning her smile, I gave a decisive nod. We had made it through the shadows. Now it was time to embrace the light.